Jake's ship had just taken its final descent when it collided with the unfamiliar terrain. He stumbled out of the wreckage, gasping for air and covered in smoke. The planet was lush, green, and seemed peaceful, but the burning remains of his ship left a harsh reminder that he wasn't going to get off this world anytime soon. There was no radio signal, no communication system. He was stranded on a strange planet. And he had no idea what was going to come next. As Jake limped through the thick undergrowth, clutching his bruised arm, he noticed something: movement. Tall figures, impossibly large women, emerged from the trees. His mind raced. They were giants, over 10 feet tall, with powerful physiques and faces that seemed to glow with an alien beauty. He froze in his tracks, heart pounding. These women were clearly not normal humans. This was a different world, and this was clearly not going to be your average alien encounter. The first one approached him with an amused glint in her eye. She was dressed in an outfit of brightly colored leather, adorned with strange symbols that hinted at an advanced culture. Her long, flowing hair matched the color of the leaves on the trees, and she had an intimidating yet welcoming smile on her lips. Jake's initial thought was to run, but his legs wouldn't move. What could he do? He had no weapons, no resources, and nowhere to go. He had to face this. The woman spoke to him in a language he couldn't understand, her voice soft and melodic. She motioned for him to come closer, and despite his fear, he slowly shuffled forward. He tried to speak, but his words came out garbled. What do you want from me?" he stammered, his eyes darting around the area. Was this some sort of trap? Were they planning to enslave him? Eat him? The possibilities were terrifying. But her smile only widened, as if amused by his fear. She motioned to the other women, and they gathered around him, their towering figures making him feel like a child in comparison. It wasn't long before Jake realized something was off. These women weren't hostile. They didn't even seem particularly interested in his physical condition. They weren't here to harm him. They were here to, what? He couldn't figure it out. His mind raced as one of the women, a striking figure with dark red hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward with a raised hand, asking him something with exaggerated gestures. She pointed at the sky, then back at the ground, and finally at him. He shook his head, confused. Then, she slapped him lightly on the back, pushing him forward in the direction of a large, ancient structure that loomed in the distance. "Come on," she said, her tone soft, almost sweet. "Don't worry. It'll be fine." "Fine?" Jake managed to sputter. "How is this fine?" His eyes darted to the others, who all seemed equally puzzled by his presence. Was this some sort of test? They led him to the structure, a giant stone edifice that seemed both ancient and modern at the same time. As they approached, Jake couldn't help but notice how easily they moved, their long strides covering the ground in just a few steps, while he had to rush to keep up. He was definitely not built for this world. Inside, the air was cooler, and the women guided him into a large chamber filled with strange alien symbols carved into the walls. The space was beautiful but foreboding, and he had no idea what was going on. Then, without warning, the women began to speak at once, their voices overlapping in an unintelligible rhythm. They circled around him, closing in. Jake's heart raced again, his mind scrambling for a way out. But then, the woman with red hair, the one who had initially guided him, stepped forward with a strange look in her eyes. She gave a signal, and suddenly the others stopped moving. The atmosphere shifted from one of tension to one of anticipation. She then spoke to him in slow, broken English. "Eat *size, or die here." Jake's mind short-circuited. What? Was she speaking seriously? What kind of test was this? He blinked several times, hoping he misunderstood. But the woman's face remained stoic, waiting for him to respond. He was too stunned to move, his brain overloaded with confusion. Before he could gather his thoughts, the red-haired woman gestured to a nearby table. There, in front of him, was a strange alien dish. It looked familiar, but not quite. Was this some kind of intergalactic food challenge? The absurdity of it hit him all at once. He had to make a choice, either engage with these mysterious women and whatever bizarre ritual they had in mind, or risk death in this alien world. Still trying to wrap his head around what was happening, Jake cleared his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What exactly do you want me to do?" The red-haired woman smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a cruel tormentor. It was the smile of someone genuinely trying to help him understand. She gestured toward the food again, and then at the women surrounding him. She explained slowly, this time using exaggerated motions to demonstrate. "To bond. To live here. You must pass the tests." She seemed amused at his confusion. Jake glanced nervously at the dish. The food, though unidentifiable, looked strangely inviting. But the context? Absolutely absurd. The situation he found himself in was like nothing he had ever imagined in his wildest dreams, or nightmares. One of the other women, who had been silently watching, burst into laughter. She approached Jake and clapped him on the back with surprising force. "Relax, little human. We just want to see if you're worthy of our tribe. It's not about what you think." Jake still didn't understand, but he had to admit, there was something oddly comforting about their demeanor. As bizarre as it was, they didn't seem like they meant any harm. The woman smiled again, and Jake could only nod slowly. What else could he do? He had to play along. The weirdness of the situation was starting to feel oddly normal. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped forward to the table. He stared at the food in front of him, trying to ignore the surreal nature of it all. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "If this is some kind of test, I'm going to nail it." And with that, the first test of his strange new life on this alien world began. Jake sat at the table, still in shock. The room, filled with towering women, felt more like an interrogation chamber than a place of refuge. He couldn't get past the absurdity of the situation. A test? What kind of test was this? Eat *size or die here? His mind was racing as he nervously eyed the strange dish in front of him. Whatever it was, it looked like food. And the fact that they had gone through all this trouble to make it, well, that made it clear this wasn't just a, "Hey, let's see if we can mess with the human" situation. No, this was something bigger. His stomach churned, but he tried to steady his nerves. No, this wasn't the time to lose his cool. There had to be a catch. It wasn't about food. It was about passing their tests. They said it was about bonding. He was starting to get the vibe that it was more about proving something. But what? The women were all watching, waiting for him to make a move. The silent pressure was unbearable, yet oddly comforting. They weren't hostile. They weren't trying to kill him. They were curious. They just wanted to see how he'd react. And the longer he stood there, the more he realized how strange that thought was. Jake glanced at the women surrounding him. The red-haired one, the one who had spoken, was giving him a grin that could only be described as both intimidating and endearing. Her smile suggested that she already knew what was coming next. She wasn't going to force him. She wasn't going to eat him. No, she was looking for something else. A connection. Something more. She wanted to see if he could laugh at it, see the humor in the situation, or if he'd fold under the pressure. Jake cleared his throat, trying to buy himself some time. "So," he began, trying to sound calm. "What exactly am I supposed to do here?" He gestured to the food in front of him. The woman smiled wider. "Eat, little human. Eat, and show us you can play our game. You're not the first to be chosen." Her tone was teasing, light-hearted, almost like she was enjoying the game they were playing. "It's a bonding ritual. And you're going to have to get used to the idea of us." She gestured to the other women, all of whom were watching intently, waiting for him to make his move. Jake's mind was racing as he stared at the dish. Was this some bizarre alien food? Or was there something else going on? A test of willpower, perhaps? He wasn't sure, but he couldn't just sit there, frozen in place. He had to make a choice. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for whatever came next. "All right, here goes nothing," he muttered to himself, picking up the utensil. It felt strange in his hand, unfamiliar and foreign. The texture of the food was unlike anything he had ever seen before, slippery, almost gelatinous, with an odd shimmer to it. He tried not to let his gag reflex get the better of him, but his stomach churned again as he took a bite. It was surprisingly good. Actually, it was better than good. His eyes widened as the taste hit him. It was sweet, with a complex mix of spices and flavors he had never experienced before. He found himself taking another bite, then another, until the dish was almost gone. The women watched in silence, their faces unreadable as Jake finished the meal. It wasn't until he set the dish down that he realized they were all staring at him, waiting for something else. The red-haired woman's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with approval. "You've passed the first test, little human," she said with a sly grin. "But it's not just about eating the food. It's about your ability to adapt, to accept what we offer, to bond with us." Jake's brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of her words. "Bonding?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "You mean I just eat your weird food and that's it?" The woman laughed softly, the sound echoing in the room. "Oh no, no. You see, this world isn't like yours. We're not like you. We have our customs, our ways. And if you want to survive here, you have to learn to adapt. The food is just the beginning." She raised an eyebrow, her expression suddenly more serious. "There are other tests to come." Jake blinked, suddenly feeling the weight of what she was saying. This was just the beginning. What other tests did they have in store for him? He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the other women. They all seemed to be waiting for something. Was this a joke? Were they testing his ability to keep up with their strange customs? Was he supposed to do something now? Should he start a dance-off or play a game of charades? His brain was spinning. Then, without warning, another woman, a tall one with dark, curly hair, stepped forward and handed Jake a small tablet. "This," she said, her voice thick with accent, "is our next challenge. You will take a quiz. It will test your knowledge. Of us. Of everything. Answer correctly and you'll continue. Answer incorrectly and—" She paused for effect, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Well, you won't be dying. But you'll certainly wish you had." Jake gulped. A quiz? Was this really happening? He looked down at the tablet, a mix of anxiety and dread building in his chest. "All right," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Let's see what I'm up against." He pressed a button on the screen, and the first question appeared. "What is the most important ritual for a new member of our tribe?" Jake blinked. He wasn't even sure what he had gotten himself into. But the longer he stared at the tablet, the more it dawned on him. This was just another test of his ability to think on his feet, to use humor and wit to survive. So, with a smirk, he typed his answer. "EP*size, of course." The women burst out laughing, and for the first time since the crash, Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe this wasn't as terrifying as he thought. Maybe there was a way to survive this after all. But as the next question appeared on the tablet, he knew this was far from over. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing tablet in his hands. The quiz had taken a bizarre turn. After his cheeky response to the first question, the women had erupted in laughter, but now the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't as light-hearted as it had been before. The women were watching him closely, their eyes sharp, as though they were waiting for him to stumble. But Jake was on a roll. He wasn't about to let this weird situation get the best of him. The next question flashed on the screen, and Jake's fingers hovered over the tablet. "What is the greatest form of affection in our tribe?" Jake frowned, unsure. What could it be? Food? Rituals? It wasn't about being weak, that was for sure. But he had no clue. Then, a light bulb went off in his head. This tribe had been playful, teasing him, testing him. It was all about the humor. The absurdity of the question itself screamed for a silly, yet clever answer. He tapped his response, complimenting their hair. Instantly, the room erupted with laughter. The women were howling, doubling over with glee. Jake grinned, proud of himself. He didn't know if that was the right answer, but it was clear he was winning them over. Humor was the key to survival here. And if that meant being a little ridiculous, so be it. The next question came up, but it didn't seem to be as light-hearted as the previous ones. How do you prove your worth to the tribe? Jake raised an eyebrow. This wasn't a joke anymore. The atmosphere was more serious now. These women weren't playing games anymore. They wanted something real. They weren't going to accept a silly answer this time. But there was no way he was going to back down now. He needed to give them something that would make him stand out. He couldn't just joke his way out of this. By proving your strength, Jake typed, his heart pounding. By showing you can keep up with the customs. By surviving the tests. The room fell silent. The women exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Jake held his breath. Had he gone too far? Was this it? Would they throw him out or punish him? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the red-haired woman, who had been the most vocal throughout, gave a slow nod. You are clever, little human, she said, her voice soft but tinged with approval. Your strength lies not in your body, but in your mind. In your adaptability. Jake blinked, processing what she had said. His mind, huh? Was that what this was all about? The tribe didn't care about how strong or fast he was. They wanted to know if he could keep up with them in their world of strange rituals and customs. They wanted to see if he could make them laugh, if he could be part of their bizarre, yet somehow welcoming, tribe. Before he could respond, the next question appeared on the tablet. What is the proper way to greet a leader of our tribe? Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what the proper greeting would be, but this wasn't the time to freeze up. He had to give them something. Something that was respectful, but still had that spark of humor that had carried him this far. He typed his response. A bow, followed by a witty one-liner. He couldn't help but laugh to himself. He didn't know why, but something about this whole situation made him giddy. He was being tested in the most absurd ways, and yet he was managing to keep his head above water. The women, for their part, didn't seem offended. In fact, the red-haired one's smile widened, and Jake could tell that she appreciated his response. She gave him a slow, thoughtful look, before speaking again. You are an interesting one, she said, her voice smooth. You understand us better than most. You're not just trying to survive. You're trying to thrive. That's what we're looking for. Jake was starting to catch on. This wasn't just about following rules or completing tasks. It was about fitting into their world, playing their game, and surviving the tests with style. If he could do that, maybe he could actually win their respect. Maybe he could even get out of here alive. But the questions kept coming, each one more bizarre than the last. How do you prove your loyalty to the tribe? Flashed across the screen. Jake grinned. Loyalty. That was a good one. He didn't need to overthink it. He didn't need to be some warrior or genius. He needed to keep the mood light and play along. His fingers tapped the screen. By not running away when things get weird. The women exchanged looks, and this time, Jake could see that they weren't just laughing, they were impressed. They were looking for someone who could handle their oddities, someone who wouldn't back down when things got uncomfortable or strange. Loyalty, the red-haired woman repeated, nodding slowly. That's what we need. You've earned our trust, human. You've passed all the tests so far. Jake exhaled in relief. He'd made it. But then, the final question appeared. The one he hadn't been prepared for. What is the most important quality to possess in our tribe? Jake stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The pressure was on. He had made it this far with wit and charm, but now, it was time for something real. What did he need to say? What did these women value the most? He took a deep breath and typed the first thing that came to his mind. The ability to laugh with them. To take the tests, the trials, and still see the humor in it all. To embrace the absurdity of everything and just keep going. The room went silent for a moment. Jake's heart raced, wondering if he had said the wrong thing. But then, the red-haired woman stepped forward, her expression softening. "You've got it," she said, her voice filled with approval. "The most important thing is to never forget the humor. Life is tough. But if you can laugh, you can survive anything." Jake smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He had done it. He had passed the tests. Not by being strong, or fast, or even by knowing all the answers, but by showing that he could adapt, that he could laugh and roll with the punches. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. And for the first time since his crash, Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to fit in. But of course, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The tribe had accepted him, but the real challenge was still ahead. Jake had learned to play their game, but now, he needed to prove he could stay in it. And with a grin on his face, he was ready for whatever came next. Jake sat back, staring at the tablet, a little overwhelmed but feeling oddly proud of himself. The tests had gotten more bizarre, but he had passed each one, using wit, humor, and just the right amount of confidence to win the respect of the tribe. He had eaten their strange food, cracked jokes, and answered their trivia questions, all without losing his cool. And now, after all the absurdities, it seemed like the final test had arrived. The pressure was on. He had made it this far, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The red-haired woman, who had been his main guide throughout all of this, stepped forward, a sly grin on her face. "You've done well, little human," she said, her tone both teasing and approving. "But now, we have one last challenge for you. The final trial." Jake's heart skipped a beat. What could possibly be left? He had already gone through speed dating with giant women, trivia questions that tested his ability to think on his feet, and even a bizarre bonding ritual with food. Now, the endgame was upon him. He couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. "Bring it on," Jake muttered, trying to sound braver than he felt. The woman's smile widened, and she motioned to the others. "You've survived the tests of wit, but now we test your strength in a different way." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The challenge is the feast." Jake blinked, confused. "Feast?" he echoed, unsure of what that could possibly mean. He had survived bizarre food challenges, but he had no idea what kind of feast these women had in mind. The red-haired woman laughed softly, clearly amused by his confusion. "It's not about what you eat," she explained. "It's about how you eat. It's about proving that you can handle our way of life, our humor, our customs, our rituals." She gestured to the table in front of them, which was now covered with strange, alien dishes. "This is your final test. The feast is a celebration of everything you've gone through to get here. And to prove you're truly one of us, you must join in." Jake's mind raced. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about proving that he could adapt to their world, their weirdness, and their culture. He had already been through so much, but this felt like the ultimate challenge. "All right," Jake said, swallowing his nerves. "What do I have to do?" The red-haired woman's smile took on a mischievous edge. "First, you must eat with us. But not just any way." She motioned to a large bowl filled with strange fruits, oddly shaped and glowing. "You must eat like we do, without utensils. Use your hands. You will eat and drink like the rest of us. There's no grace in this meal. It's primal. It's raw." Jake raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. But as the women around him began to grab the fruit, tearing into it with their bare hands, he realized there was no turning back. This was the moment he had been working toward. If he wanted to prove he could handle their world, if he wanted to belong here, he had to dive in. No more thinking. Just doing. Without another word, Jake reached for the fruit. It was strangely soft, and the skin peeled away easily. As he bit into it, the taste exploded in his mouth, sweet, tart, and otherworldly. He could feel the eyes of the women on him, watching his every move. They were testing him again. Could he keep up? Could he handle their strange customs without hesitation? The more he ate, the more he felt the weight of their gazes. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the ritual of eating, of bonding in their own way, of showing that he could be one of them. Jake forced himself to swallow his discomfort and keep going. The fruit was delicious, but the challenge wasn't about the flavor. It was about fitting in. About being part of something bigger than himself. He looked up at the women, his mouth full of fruit, and saw their smiles of approval. They weren't looking at him with judgment or mockery. They were looking at him like he had passed some sort of test. Like he had proven himself worthy. For the first time since his crash, Jake felt like he might actually make it here. He wasn't just some lost human anymore. He was part of something. He was part of their world. The red-haired woman leaned in closer, her voice almost a whisper. "You're doing well, little human. But the next part of the feast is about something more than eating. It's about what comes next." Jake wiped his hands on his pants, trying to keep his composure. "What's next?" he asked, trying to mask his nervousness. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up, motioning for the others to follow suit. "Now we drink," she said, a gleam in her eyes. "But it's not just any drink. This drink represents everything you've been through. It represents your ability to adapt, to fit in, to handle our world." One of the other women handed Jake a strange, glowing cup. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, neon blue liquid swirling inside, radiating a soft light. "Drink," she said simply. "Show us that you can embrace our ways." Jake hesitated. This wasn't just food anymore. This was about trust. About accepting their customs, no matter how strange. But what was in that cup? Was it safe? He had no idea. But he couldn't back out now. He had already made it this far. With a deep breath, Jake raised the cup to his lips and took a sip. The liquid burned going down, but not in a painful way. It was warm and invigorating, and it sent a jolt of energy through him. He could feel the heat spreading in his chest, like fire coursing through his veins. For a moment, he felt invincible. He felt like he could take on anything. And when he looked up at the women, he saw something in their eyes: approval. Respect. They were waiting for him to show them that he could handle their world. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised the cup again and drank more, savoring the strange yet energizing sensation it gave him. The women smiled wider, nodding in approval. "Welcome to our tribe, human," the red-haired woman said softly, her voice full of pride. "You've earned your place here." Jake smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He had passed the tests, survived their strange customs, and earned their respect. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. He had finally found a place where he belonged, where he could be accepted for who he was, flaws, wit, and all. The challenges weren't over, but Jake had learned the most important lesson: survival in this world wasn't about brute strength or fear. It was about humor, adaptability, and finding the ability to laugh in the face of the absurd. And with that, Jake knew he was ready for whatever came next.